All right, first question of the day. Oops.
Are you kidding?
Did you find it this week? We'll come to it in a minute. By the way, Loretta and I were walking down the street, Main Street in Dubrovnik, Croatia, the first day of our cruise. And somebody up ahead said, Loran, Loretta, what are you doing here? And I looked at Tim Hotzen, who's back there, and Joyce Hotzen.
Are you serious?
And
That's funny.
they were there on a trip of their own. So it's good to see a friendly face in Dubrovnik. All right, we'll come back to this here in a minute. The lesson, I would have 5 chapters here. I think it's at 5 or 6. 7. I'm only going to deal with the first 4. The rest of them are just stories about they murdered this entire population, then they murdered that entire population because they cleaned out Canaan. I am not going to ignore that topic. We'll come to it. So we're going to talk about the fall of Jericho, Achan's sin. Then the Israelites finally have success and defeat Ai. Is the answer. The Lord's, and then the Lord's covenant renewed, and then finally the Gibeonites deceive Israel. The rest of the passage that I had today was that, and I'm not going to deal with that other than I got one map to show how it progressed. So the Andrews Bible commentary, which looks like this, and it's really a great commentary. It's a 2-volume commentary, 1 volume for the Old Testament, 1 volume for the New Testament. And instead of being one of those commentaries that does an exegesis on every single word and says this in the Greek, this could mean this or it could mean that, but we think it means this. It's just a narrative. These 10, 12 verses are basically talking about whatever. It's a good commentary. I would commend it to you. We're going to be in the Old Testament for months, years actually. So I don't remember what it cost, but I got it for me for Christmas last year. So I don't know what it cost. In the introduction to the book of Joshua, the Andrews Bible commentary talks about the theology and purpose in Joshua and mentions these 4 topics. It's about covenant and covenant faithfulness. It's about God's sovereignty, it's about judgment, and it's about true leadership. The book of Joshua. And my iPad fired up here. Obviously, I'm going to reading what's on the screen. Obviously, the major theological theme of the book of Joshua is the covenant. Lord said, first to Abraham, I want you to leave the country where you grew up, and I want you to go to this land that I'm going to lead you to, and I'm going to give that land to you as a permanent residence, and it'll be a demonstration of the covenant between me and you, the people. So the theological theme is the covenant. The central element of the covenant is the promise to inhabit the Holy Land. As such, the book repeatedly emphasizes the Lord's faithfulness in fulfilling the promise of the covenant. Israel was a covenant nation and thus required to keep the covenant. But remember, we just studied Exodus 19 to 24 a few weeks or months back. The covenant was conditional. If you do this, I'll do this. Right? It's a conditional covenant. As enshrined in the covenant provisions, any deviations were punishable, yet this was a means to protect the divine. That's from then the next 3 topics, God's sovereignty. And again, I'm reading from the Andrews, this was a synopsis of the Andrews Bible commentary. The book also places quite an emphasis on the sovereignty of God. He is the living God whose promises do not fail. The Exodus and the conquest, therefore, demonstrate that the sovereign Lord intervenes in history to accomplish his purposes for humanity. So God is sovereign. The judgment, the book also discusses judgment and salvation within the confines of the covenant. For example, the unfaithful died in the wilderness because they didn't keep the covenant with God. Achan and his family were destroyed, we're going to talk about. On the other hand, those who sought refuge in the Lord by joining the covenant community found salvation, such as Rahab and her family and the Gibeonites. which we're going to talk about. We also find in the book, number 4, the true leadership, we also find in the book a theology of true leadership, a theology of leadership. I don't know that we'll have time to get to that, but if we do, I have some things to. It is God who establishes leaders. God's people always had a leader, yet the success of leaders depends on their total submission to the will of the Lord. So this map shows a major part of what we're going to talk about today. The red line, remember they were camped in Shittim, and there were some in the camp that said, this is pretty nice over here. Why do we got to go across the river and run the risks of fighting these armed cities of the Canaanites? Let's just stay over here on the east side of the Jordan. But that wasn't God's plan. And so they came across, and Joshua set up a temporary headquarters in the town of Gilgal, which was close to Jericho, which was close to Ai, Bethel, and Shechem. So that's the part of Israel that we're going to be talking about. So the fall of Jericho. Greg texted me yesterday and said, by the way, I didn't cover the 2 spies that went in to check out Jericho. So if you want to go back and do that. We didn't talk about it at the picnic. And I decided not to do any slides about it, but I do have one question. Joshua was one of the 12 spies that was sent from Kadesh Barnea, I think was the place, to spy out the land of Canaan 40 years before. And they came back and said, yeah, it's a beautiful land, lots of grapefruit. Here's a huge cluster of grapes, figs, pomegranates, everything. We saw a lot of pomegranate trees on our trip to the Mediterranean, by the way, and fig trees. And lost my train of thought.
He was one of the 12 spies.
Oh yeah, he was one of the 12 spies that went in, and that didn't turn out so good because 10 of the 12 gave a bad report or an accurate but pessimistic report. There are great walled cities. Yes, there are some very tall individuals, giants, but God will be with us. We can do it. And the others said, nah, this is too scary. We can't be successful against them. And you know how that turned out. So here they come up to the promised land again. They're on the eastern side of the Jordan River. And Joshua says, I got an idea. Let's send 2 spies over to check out Jericho. My reaction in thinking about it in the last 24 hours was, why? Didn't turn out good last time, but he sent them. And just to go over the story a little bit, he sent them. They must have been dressed differently, or in some way the Jericho leadership identified the fact that they were 2 Israelites, and they were concerned that they were sent there to spy, and they sought refuge in the red light district, the home of Rahab. And this is the part I don't get when we come to this Rahab here in a minute and talk about her in more depth. She lied to them. She said, yeah, they were here, but they left at dusk before the city gates closed so they could get out. And I'm pretty sure they went that way. When in fact, they were hiding under flax straw on the roof of her house, which was in the wall of the city. So she flat out lied. So she had at least 2 strikes against her. She was a lady of the night, and she was a liar. And yet we know how it turned out. Probably all of you have some kind of version of this picture in your mind. You've seen it from My Bible Story, Arthur Maxwell, the father of Maxwell, some version, but let's look a little bit at God's instructions for the conquest of Jericho. God said, do not take any of the things apart for destruction, or you will yourselves will be completely destroyed, and you will be in trouble on the camp of Israel. By the way, if you want to follow along, this is Joshua chapter 6. If you have an electronic Bible or maybe you actually carry real leather-bound Bibles. Everything made from silver, gold, and bronze or iron is sacred to the Lord and must be brought to his treasury. Meanwhile, and then I skip a little bit. Meanwhile, Joshua said to the 2 spies, keep your promise, go to the prostitute's house and bring her out along with her family. The men who had been spies went in and brought out Rahab, her father, her mother, brothers, and all the other relatives who were with her, and they moved her whole family to a safe place near, but not in, the camp of Israel. Then the Israelites burned the town and everything in it. Only the things made of silver, gold, and bronze or iron were kept for the treasury of the Lord. So we go. So let's talk a little bit about Rahab. When you think about Rahab, what adjectives come to mind? Scriptures. Terry.
Glad you came back to her. I never thought about this, but he was honored.
Yes.
You know, he lied and did this and that. We don't know what caused her to go into prostitution. Like Mary Magdalene.
Mm-hmm. I thought of that too.
They know men, and they know men that are honest and men that are rats. Usually the rats are leaders.
Mhm.
Really, yeah, that's how you get there. And she probably detected right away, these were genuine men with a good Christian mind. So lying was no big deal. She's gonna protect them against these rats. And so, shoot, she's honored in Jesus' genealogy. I mean,
Right.
pretty cool.
Right, right. Agreed. Any, what adjectives? Bad, good, bad,
Savvy.
savvy. I like that one, savvy. If I could write, well, I'd put them on the board, but Tim,
Familial is her family. She saved her family. They didn't disown her or leave or, you know, she had family.
okay, good, good.
She cared for her family. In spite of
did?
her-
You did. Other adjectives, Maureen,
Honor for God. She was
Honor
the
for
one
God.
who said, you know, we heard what God did, and there was just something, you know, that, something else for her to think about.
Mhm.
That, you know, that they knew about God before they even, the spies got there. But
Okay.
it must have been something they were, you know.
Mhm.
So she would be a believer.
A believer, okay, good. Erica,
Someone sitting near me brought to mind that she was really special because Jesus came from her life,
that's right.
her family.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Gonna make reference to that in a second. Elmer,
So I think you have to read between the lines, but she lived strategically, living on the wall. She knew the movement of troops, the comings, the goings, whether it affected her job choice or not. But she was very aware of the political side of the city by where she lived.
politically savvy, okay, good. I don't want to belabor this, but. All right, next question about Rahab. Oops. What conclusion did Rahab make about the God of Israel? What conclusion did she reach? When she was talking to the spies, she made some acknowledgements about God. What were they?
That the Lord had given them that land.
Right, okay. We know that the Lord has promised you this land. Somehow she knew about the covenant with Abraham.
She's up to date with the current affair.
I'm sorry,
She's up to date with the current affair.
up to date with current events. Okay, okay.
And I think that, you know, we like Rahab and all of that, but God is in the middle of the whole thing because he's touching her heart.
Right.
And bringing her about in the way that he wants to do.
Right, right. I've got a nice quote that speaks exactly to that point. Read it in just a second. All right, next question. What in the world's happening here? Could anyone in Jericho have come to the same conclusion? Was she so unique that she came to this conclusion in a way that was not open to any other resident of Jericho?
No.
Eugene,
Is this potentially, Sodom and Gomorrah, there was a judgment aspect to it? Possibly that there was no others that were open to believe?
this morning when I was reading, I read something that suggested that God had already given the inhabitants of Canaan a rather striking example about how he felt about evil. Remember the cities of Sodom, particularly Sodom, where the angels went and the men of Sodom said, bring them out here. We want to had relations with them, which led to the term we use today of sodomy. So it was a bad place, and God incinerated it. To the point that people that have been to, like Kelly, that have been to Israel say there's nothing there to this day. It's cursed. Nothing grows, nothing there. So they had knowledge of, apparently of right, wrong, evil, and yet we're gonna read here briefly that they were, the whole Canaanite region had become like Sodom and Gomorrah, basically. The intentions of their heart were evil continuously. They were just bad people, did bad things. We'll see if that, we'll touch on that in a minute. Rahab was given an opportunity to make a conscious choice for God based on the facts that she knew about him. And she responded with faith. Faith resulted in action. What did she do that day? Despised, lied about where they were, sent the men of Jericho off, go off in this direction when they were actually going to go this direction when they went over the wall. What risk was she taking? Yeah, if she'd been caught, they'd have put her in nothing. Respect for a prostitute, a woman, let alone a prostitute. What was the ultimate result? And I think Erica's boy, Brandon, brought it up. She was in the line of Christ, lineage of Christ. What a testimony! Huh? In fact, my pet keeps going to sleep. Rahab is mentioned 3 times in the New Testament. First one is the one that Brandon referenced, Matthew 1, 5, and 6. Salmon was the father of Boaz, whose wife was Rahab, a non-Israelite woman. Boaz was the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, a non-Israelite woman. Obed was the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of King Jesus. There sits Rahab, Ruth and Rahab, right in the lineage. Hebrews 11, the faith chapter references Rahab. It was by faith that Rahab the prostitute was not destroyed with the people in her city who refused to obey God, for she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. By faith. And then the apostle James, in James chapter 2, said, Rahab the prostitute is another example. She was shown to be right with God by her actions when she hid those messengers and sent them safely by a different road. And, what lessons can we draw from this part of the story, the narrative? Homer?
God can use a lady of the night, albeit she had some good qualities. What does that mean for us, that what gifts we have, God can use to his end?
Driving to church this morning, as I do at least 50% of Sabbaths, I connect my iPhone to the dashboard and I listen to the song by Joseph Habedank. What's the title? Just when I knew, something like that. And he talks about we're never too far from God's grace. Love that song. We've played it here in class. I played it a couple of years back. Beautiful message. We're never too far from God's grace, to speak to Elmer's point. Barbara.
For me, this embeds the story of Jesus' coming purpose for forgiveness and salvation right in his genealogy, because all 4 women who are listed are tainted. Now, Ruth was only tainted by being a foreigner, and there's also Tamar in there. So, just their presence is a testimony to his mission.
Great, Tom.
Let's not be so fast to write people off.
Okay, that's a good lesson. Don. No, not Don, that's your. Todd, it'll come to me.
And tying into your other question, I think probably the whole city came to the same conclusion that they were in trouble. Davis, everybody else decided to rely on themselves and their own strength and the strength of their walls. And she had the foresight to see that's probably not gonna save us, so she went the other way and.
She negotiated with the
Yeah,
spies.
she negotiated with the spies and put her faith that they would keep their word and honor their God.
Terry,
It's kind of alluded to already, but it's interesting throughout the ages, including disciples. God usually chooses people that aren't in the mainstream of accepted leaders of the day.
oftentimes, yeah.
David, he was the least be chosen,
Mhm.
brothers, and you go through the disciples, they were not honored. So that's the encouragement is, God says, I don't care what other people think about you. I've got a beeline into your heart.
Right. Right, exactly.
I think it's interesting the spies 2.0 versus spies 1.0. They came back with information she shared with them, which was, these people are scared to death of you.
They're trembling. Yeah, yeah.
So despite they're giants, we'll never beat them. They came back with a message that says, scared of us.
Open optimism.
That had to be a bolstering thing.
Sure,
for Israel.
sure. Did I have a hand over here? Eugene.
What does it speak though to? She, you were talking about her not telling the truth and hiding them. And the life is potentially complicated. And because if those who are the letter of the law not bear false witness, what do you do with the, don't lie? But is there circumstances in an evil world? I don't know the answer to that, but what do you do in those circumstances?
Justify a justifiable lie.
Yeah, she would, protect people that at the risk of her own life, but she'd have to not be truthful in the face of evil.
Mhm, mhm. Please.
I think we don't give Rahab credit enough. When you think about the fact that Jericho was very secure place, it was fortified. The people thought that they would be in that secure place indefinitely forever. But she was able to see that there was change coming, and like doing God's will.
Right.
And the Bible somewhere says that one of the dangers of the last days is the fact that people will be saying peace, and even sudden destruction comes. And so to be able to see that the this judgment comes in the midst of safety, it needs to be applauded.
Very good. Good. Hands everywhere. Cheryl and then Debbie.
I just want to interject about.
I'm sorry, you had your hand too.
Yeah, I want to interject something that my brother is in Australia in one Sabbath sermon, which I never heard before. It's really kind of give me a different view. Remember, they just crossed the Jordan.
Right.
And
Miraculously.
they crossed the Jordan. God intervened and they split the river, right? So they know God is involved in all this difficulty. And yet when they see this giant in the other, when they cross this giant, they get discouraged. Why is their faith? They're just being protected to the Jordan. Why are they chicken right now? So that's something, I think that's probably, I was like, that's true. I said, and I heard this in a sermon before in my life. I said, that's a very good point. And I remember that very well. I said, you know what? In our adversity, you have to remember God has led us this far. And so the Lord will always lead us through.
Good point. You had your hand and then I'll go to Debbie.
The question up there was a lot of faith. I think we also need to understand, I feel there was a lot of faith exhibited by the Israelites who listened to Joshua and were willing to march around, not saying a word, and march around that city, that large city, and have the faith to believe that what they were doing was going to be successful. I think those people have, as a comment to what you said, they had lost some faith, but this took faith just to do what God had asked them to do. And when you think about boots or shoes,
still going along, boom, 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 boom. I think that helped to really put your boots on. I think about marching, just seeing all those people marching. I think that took place too.
Yeah, something I read this morning suggested, what was Rahab thinking for the first day, the second day, the third day, the fourth day? Debbie?
Well, this is just an observation to the thou shalt not bear false witness commandment. There's also a commandment, thou shalt not kill, and they did a lot of killing.
Very true, very true. Let's move on. Oh, please, Darian.
Just thank God first and foremost for his faithfulness. One of the things that you were saying a little earlier about how they had that fear, it's funny because if you look at 2:9-11, it talks about how they had the fear of the Lord. So they knew the power of the Lord, which is really interesting. One of the things that you said earlier was how originally he was part of the 12, but then he saw 2. I thought about Jesus, how he sent 2 out. But what would have happened if they would have done the same thing again? Would she have been able to hide 12 people? So I think it's powerful that, Joshua was in tune with God. He knew what was needed. And Rahab, I believe she was opportunistic in terms of when she saw them, she was like, wait, this is the Lord's people.
Right.
I know what's about to happen. We hear what you've done. We've seen what you've done. We've heard about the Red Sea. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna help you out, and I'm gonna do everything I can because I believe in your God. I believe in what you're saying. We've heard the stories. We have the fear. So if you're about to do what you did there, I'm gonna get on your side. And I'm gonna ask for your help to get me out of here.
Very good.
So when she was seeing them march, she was like, okay, it's about to go down. I hope they remember that promise.
She was opportunistic, and to the point that Walter. I've been gone too long. Walter, I know you well, but anyway, let me to the point you made, let me read this. For centuries, this is a woman commentator that I found in my research. For centuries, Christians have tried to soften Rahab's reputation by arguing that she was only an innkeeper. But the New Testament references that I read a minute ago all indicate that she was an immoral woman. God loved Rahab. He knew what was going on in her life. He was able to do something about it, but God did not keep Rahab from losing the security of her home. It was destroyed when the walls fell. Nor did he prevent her from having to go through, this is where I read it, go through the agony of watching the Israelites march around the city 7 days in a row when she stepped out in faith. So remember that she didn't know God's plan. She stepped out in faith. He met her there. She trusted him to rescue her, and he did. God judged her by her heart, the inward woman, not by her lifestyle, moral lifestyle, the outward appearance. He not only saved her life, but he forgave her past and gave her a new future. She chose to trust him rather than submit to fear. And it did remind me of whoever said it, a story about Mary Magdalene. She was so grateful to Jesus for giving her this similar lifestyle. All right, let's keep moving. Chapter 7, artificial intelligence and AI. That is a picture that's familiar to all of us, right? By the way, I neglected something I wanted to talk about. In Deuteronomy chapter 7, so remember Deuteronomy was written by Moses as he was wanting to leave some final wisdom with the children of Israel. That's why the 10 Commandments are repeated in Deuteronomy 5, I think it is, for example. Let me just read a few things here from Deuteronomy chapter 7. If you got your Bible there electronically, look at it. When the Lord your God brings you into the land you're about to enter, he will clear away many nations ahead of you. Then he lists all the ites, Hittites, whatever, Amorites, Canaanites, all the ites. These 7 nations are greater and more numerous than you. When the Lord your God hands these nations over to you and you conquer them, this is God talking, you must completely destroy them. Make no treaties with them and show no mercy. You must not intermarry. They will lead your children away from you. need to worship other gods. This is what you must do. Break down the pagan altars, shatter their sacred pillars, cut down the Asherah poles, and burn their idols, for you are a holy people and you belong to me. The Lord loves you, is keeping an oath he has sworn to your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, etc. But he does not hesitate to punish and destroy those who reject him. Therefore, you must obey all these commands and decrees, and regulations I'm giving you today. Here's the conditional part, right? If you listen to these regulations and faithfully obey them, the Lord your God will keep his covenant of unfailing love with you, as he promised an oath to your ancestors. So it can't be clearer than that. That's what God told Moses to tell them. These are bad people. Their moral depravity has reached a point where they're unredeemable, and you must destroy them, or they will, if you intermarry with them and make treaties with them and co-mingle with them, live with them, they will bring you down. Just a little further, you must, chapter 7 of Deuteronomy, you must destroy all the nations the Lord your God hands over to you. Show them no mercy. Do not worship their gods, or they will trap you. Subsequently, they did anyway. The Lord your God will drive these nations out ahead of you little by little. Here's a key, verse 25 and 26. You must burn their idols in fire. You must not covet. Be critical of what we've got. You must not covet the silver or gold that covers them, covers the idols. You must not take it, or it will become a trap to you, for it is detestable to the Lord your God. Detestable. Do not bring any detestable objects into your home, for then you will be destroyed. Do not bring any detestable objects into your home, or you will be destroyed. So that's at the crux of this eighth issue. Yes, please.
In your reading, and I, at the risk of being told earlier not to bring this up, I'm gonna do it anyway. The idea of God saying everyone, men, women, children, animals. Why the animals?
Well, you know, I had that question in my mind too until I read chapters 10, 11, and 12 this morning. Just to make sure there wasn't anything there I wanted to reference. The only thing I got from that, other than they went from city to city destroying them, God eventually said, you can keep the cattle. It was not every single Canaanite city that they destroyed. If you look at chapters 10, 11, and 12, you'll see that he said, you can keep the cattle. He didn't say you can keep the Babylonian garments or some of the stuff, but you can, you don't have to. I don't know. I don't have an answer for that other than to say God is sovereign.
If it's compared to Sodom, Sodom was incinerated, which you assume animals and everything else were taken. It's
women, children, animals.
This is the difficulty that I've heard discussed, the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament. And it's a difficult point to discuss.
You think that after, so one of the things I read is probably coming up in my notes, but since it's on the top of my head right now, I'll mention it. One of the commentators said, it might have been the Andrews Bible commentary, that they had the lesson of Sodom and Gomorrah. That's not the kind of thing that goes away in people's minds. For years, decades, you would talk about, look what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah. So the point being that they knew how God regarded the moral depravity in which they lived, sexual and every other way, moral depravity. And they had a chance when Israel was on their doorstep to say, wow, we better repent. I don't think probation closed for them until they were destroyed. But they didn't take the lesson of history. They didn't learn from their ways. Arthur.
Thinking about it, when you read the violence and so on, and the death and destruction, is that any worse than the flood? Because the flood, you had babies, you had
every living thing on earth. It wasn't in the ark, it was killed.
So it's, you know, it was God's way of saying, look, I can't tolerate this any longer. And he was using the children of Israel for his purpose, right?
Mhm.
I mean, if you recall, Joshua stood by Jericho. And he saw this warrior. And he says, who are you for? Are you for us or are you for them? What did he say? Neither. I'm neither for you or for them. I'm for God. So I represent God. So.
Ellen White says that was Christ, that angel.
It's in God's fight. It's the fight of the Israelites versus them. It's God's way of using them for his purpose.
I agree. Nicely put. Nicely put. Walter.
With all due respect, I don't think that the God of the Old Testament is any different than the new one. Okay? I think it's the same God.
It is.
I
Jesus
think
Christ.
that our perception of it, because we want to massage the thing, wants us to blame him for the lie of Satan. And he still remains a liar. He's gonna be a liar till the end. And when you lie, you die.
When you misrepresent God.
One example of it, you know, Judas, I feel bad that he committed suicide. But Judas couldn't live with himself knowing what he had lied about.
Mhm.
And that is what it happens to everyone that wants to turn away from God and do his own thing instead of accepting his great salvation through the blood of Jesus.
Mhm. Nicely put. Thank you. So this is just a picture I found on Google Images. The bar, there was one single bar of gold weighed a pound and 200 silver shekels and a Babylonian, a fancy Babylonian garment. But God had said, burn the statues. Don't take it for yourselves. We already read this. You will be completely destroyed along with the things if you take it. So, Terry.
You haven't mentioned that, although you alluded to Deuteronomy as a repeat.
Right.
And there, the Ten Commandments are repeated, but the Sabbath has said you keep it because you were delivered from slavery. Doesn't say anything about creation. And of course, those who say the Sabbath is no longer valid. The Sabbath is part of the very character of God. And follow the whole line of thought. In Genesis, the world was dark without form and void. So out of chaos, he created beauty. And he says, keep the Sabbath to remember I'm the creator, that chaos and beauty. And I understand him saying to the Israelites, keep the Sabbath because you were in darkness, you were in slavery, but now you're in a promised land. So it fits the narrative. Then you get to the New Testament, and Paul says, you were once slaves to sin, now you're new creatures. Interesting term. You are a new creation. The God who created something out of darkness, so it's the same Sabbath theme. This is a character of God. He takes darkness and creates beauty. And then it talks about the Sabbath yet to come, which I believe is the new earth, where he finally, again, takes the darkness of his current world and turns it into a paradise. So when people talk about, well, it was only a Sabbath that was meant for a certain period of time, I said, no, it's part of the very description of God's character. He takes ugliness and slavery and creates new, beautiful things.
Jeff.
Loran, I don't think this answers every question that we have about this story about Achan. But it is interesting that in this time of human history, or as it's recorded in history, there was much more a sense of the collective redemption, rescue, collective condemnation. What one person did carried out the consequences for the whole community. And at some point along the way in our theology and understanding of God, we moved very sharply into the individual. My choice determines my destiny, but my choice does not determine your destiny. We each have our own choice. This story comes to us from the time when you say sin in the camp. The whole camp rose or fell based on the actions of the outliers for whatever reason. And that's one way to understand the story. And certainly Achan presents, I think, a different moral dilemma than the dilemma of the genocide of the towns, because Achan had warning, clear instructions. He knew what the consequences were. That differentiates his situation, I think, from the children of the Canaanites in a, city that got wiped out. Kind of intensity of question.
Well put, and I agree. So here's the quote I was just getting ready to read, and it's from the Andrews Bible Commentary. So, as a covenantal community, Israel shared a corporate identity. So the sin of one member affected the whole community until it was purged. That's what Jeff, you were just saying. Similarly, by violating the covenant and thus bringing himself under the curse, Achan damaged all who shared in his identity. The importance of the covenant theme in Joshua is further highlighted by the several references to its renewal in Joshua 8, which we're going to talk about if time allows. Joshua's exhortation against disobedience, idolatry, and intermarriage with the Canaanites summarizes the covenant demand for Israel. Most everything I read is, well, I prepared this lesson 4 weeks ago before we left on trip, but spoke to the point that Jeff just made. This was that they were in a covenantal relationship with God, and the sin of one affected everyone. And then what about this question? Why did God judge the sin of Achan so severely? Which one of these two things bothers you the most? The way that Achan was judged and his family, or the way that the cities and the inhabitants of Canaan were treated?
The cities.
I'm sorry?
The cities.
The cities, yeah.
I really struggle with that. I don't have a good answer either.
Anyone else enlightened? Eugene?
It seems like judgment seems to be part of the salvation process. And the sin is dealt like a cancer. If it continues, then it'll affect everything and everybody.
It's good metaphor.
The flood is also part of that. If he doesn't intervene, man will destroy himself. To fulfill his promise in Genesis 3, he has to take action. And so he seems to take more action. He's using Joshua and the people of Israel, the covenant people, to follow through on their purposes.
So they suffer a stinging. They go up to the gates of Ai and they come out and chase them all, and they run like scared chickens, and 36 men are killed, and they come back with a tail between their legs, and Joshua falls down on his face before the Lord and says, "What? How could this happen to us?" What was Joshua's mistake? He said, "God, you gave us a great victory in Jericho. How would you like to handle this AI situation?" Oh, he chose spies again. And he sent some men to check it out. And they came back and said, "Man, this is a little hamlet. 2,000-3,000 men is plenty. We got this thing." They had become self-reliant. It's about us. It's a great victories we're winning here. And so they were humiliated and defeated. And then Joshua fell on his face and pled with the Lord. And the Lord said, "Get up off your face." They put dust in their hair and all that stuff. And God said, "Get up. You've got sin. You got sin in your house here, and you got to fix it. I'm willing to reconsider things if you make this situation right." So they cast lots. Now, can you imagine Achan sitting in his tent saying, "Dang, I hope this thing doesn't fall on me"? Was that a reasonable hope? Tribe, family, tribe, clan, family, eventually individual. Achan, it's you. And they brought Achan before Joshua and says, "What is it that you've done?" And he said, "Well, I saw this really neat coat. Dang, that would look good on me." And he saw that money, that shekels of silver, and that bar, a pound of gold. I could sure use that for my redemption. And so he took it. What was Achan's sin? Of the 10 commandments, which one did Achan break? Covet, number 10, to covet you. Thou shalt not covet. Achan coveted those things. And I found this, his sin was discovered, of course, by the casting of lots. God commanded that Achan and his entire family and all his possessions be destroyed, a punishment that seems overly harsh to us today in our time, our culture. How are we to understand this dire act of God? There are several reasons for the severe penalty God inflicted upon Achan. One, Achan's sin afflicted the entire nation, caused the loss of the first attempt at AI. God says that the Israelites acted unfaithfully and that his anger burned against Israel. He was angry. Well, the nation, I'll get you in a second, Jackie. The nation as a whole was in a covenant relationship with God, and when one member transgressed that covenant, the entire nation's relationship with him was damaged. Achan defiled the other members of the community as well as himself. And that was Jeff's point a minute ago.
I was just thinking that, like, hey, this wasn't a once and done thing. It was cumulative. He was making bad choices. I've been looking for this verse in Isaiah. It says, and God shall not judge by the sight of his eyes, nor decide by the hearing of his ears. I'm sure there was a lot of criticism about God. How can you be so cruel? I mean, give me a break. And yet, God doesn't judge by what we see, what we hear. He's looking at the heart.
And he made them drag Achan out into a valley that's named after it. I'll get you a derivation of Achan's name, Achor, in the valley of Achor. And people themselves stoned Achan to death and his family. There
I listened to some commentary today and even last time we were in this room about, struggling with how God can do this. And one of the things that was revealed to me, I'm not sure if it was last week or the week before, is it ties into Pastor Matt's message today. We're looking at it from our lens and not from the lens of God. The reality is this: from our lens, man, God, how could you do this? How could this happen? Like, why would you kill a child? But the reality is, we're God's. He could do whatever he wants to with us. And it ties back to this quick scripture in Romans 9, which is Romans 9 and 20. And it starts with, but who are you, O man, to talk back to God? Shall what was formed say to who formed it? Why did you make me like this? Does the potter have the right to make out of all the same lump of clay, some pottery for noble purposes and some for common use? And I think we struggle with the common use part. What if God, choosing to show his wrath and make his power known, bore with great patience the objects of his wrath, prepared for destruction? I think we struggle with the idea that some of his pottery is made for destruction to show his glory, to show his faithfulness, to show his patience, to have the fear of Lord. And that's probably a powerful revelation for me. And I pray it's a revelation for others, that we're God's. He does what he wants. And we have to look at it from his lens and not ours.
Okay, good. Barbara.
So I've been trying to look at this from the perspective of me right now here. Ellen White in Patriarchs and Prophets spent quite a bit of time talking about covetousness, which is, a commandment we don't give a lot of attention to, but how do we deal with material things and whatnot? And one of the thoughts I had was that it talks about Ai. It said only a few men are there. It was a small city. God said they could have the spoils after Jericho. And I'm just thinking he could have been thinking to himself, I fought in this, but there's a million of us, maybe two. I don't know how many were still there after the initial. And I'm probably not going to get anything. I'm just going to take this. And he thought, I probably do this because I contributed to that. I mean, you just think about how we think sometimes about our rewards and what we deserve and things like that. And I could just see the thought processes.
Rationalization, right? Oh my goodness, hands everywhere. So, I mean, Arthur was trying to talk a while ago, so I'm gonna do Arthur and Brian.
You know, throughout the Old Testament, the word covenant keeps coming up. And a covenant has terms and conditions. It talks about blessings, curses. The question is, are the blessings of God conditional or unconditional? Or can it be both?
I think there's, I haven't given that much thought, but I think there's probably examples of both. Conditional and unconditional, but as it regards this topic in Deuteronomy said, if you do these things, then throughout the Bible, it said, if you keep your covenant with me, I'll bless you. You'll have good health. Your herds will multiply. Your crops will be good. You'll prosper. And yet they chose over and over again to reject that option and to not.
So how does that apply to us? Are the blessings of God conditional or unconditional in relation to us?
What do you think?
The ultimate blessing. Well, I think the ultimate blessing from God is salvation. I think, again, it takes us back to the cross, right? The conditions of the law was met. God can love us unconditionally. I think he met the conditions for us to be loved.
So we covered, all right, I'm gonna let Walter and Terry speak. That's it, no more. Hands everywhere, Terry and then Walter.
Why doesn't?
I'm gonna skip Brian, I'm sorry.
God have cast lots today. He would make hospital boards, church boards, so much. I mean, seriously, I mean, they didn't do any investigations. They just put, here's different options, and Aiken's one of them. They cast lots. Would it be easier to come to a board? You got 4 options. You haven't studied them much. You just say, we'll assign a number to the dice, roll the dice 3 times. If it comes up that number, we know God's in it, but no, it's silly.
Or the Urim and the thumb.
Did he make us work so hard when back then those were the really chosen?
Yeah. Good question.
Yes, thanks for the answer.
Welcome. Walter, you're the.
God is a God of mercy. He can, at any time like I do, he could have gone ahead and repented, right? And maybe the outcome would have been totally different, but he chose deliberately not to. Wow. And that is the issue here in the center, because we want to blame God for killing Achan. And we keep thinking, man, God is harsh. But God has provided salvation, which means that he is going to heal me. That is what he's going to do. He could have healed Achan. He could have healed everyone along the way if they would have just allowed him into their lives.
Right, well put, that's a good summary. So I got through half of the topics I had, and that's fine. Better to have too much than not enough. In closing, what is your number one, for you personally, your number one takeaway from passages that we studied this morning? What are you gonna go home today and say, I gained a new insight about God or whatever?
Complicated.
Brian, good, Brian, you're gonna get you in after all.
I think we've got 2 stories here that both reflect the Lord meets you where you are.
Right.
Achan knew better, did it anyway.
Right.
If he had been, oblivious to it, he wouldn't have hidden the stuff. He'd have paraded around in the new robe and look what I found. And whereas Rahab, her journey of faith, she didn't know any better. Had she had a stronger faith relationship, she would have said, they're hiding upstairs in the flex pile. And the Lord would have intervened, and probably the soldiers would have said, crazy woman, and moved on their way. They'd have been protected either way. But her journey in faith wasn't as strong. The Lord used it anyway. He met her where she was with her journey. Achan he expected more of, and he got different consequences. She was praised, stoned.
That's a great takeaway. Anyone else? One or two more, and then we'll close. All right. I hope we get some cooler, less humid weather soon. Thank you for being here and participating in the study. We'll see you next week. And I teach again in 2 weeks because there is some punishment for going without teaching, and that's my punishment.
Think of the, where you were
All right.
on the cruise.
All right.